My question is relates to Ukraine. If you don't want to segue, I respect that because
No,
this is
oh,
past
please, please,
discussion.
please do.
But I'm really curious why we don't hear more about the kind of similarities between Putin and Trump meeting in Alaska and the Munich agreement in 1938 when the Czechs were just cut out of that whole conversation. It just feels a little bit, um, well, it is
Well, I mean,
bilateral.
I certainly read comparisons to it, I'd say there's a lot of differences, and one is the Europeans are central here, right? They're going to talk to the president and vice president tomorrow, and they're not interested in violating the Biden administration view of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. So I understand why you're raising it and others have raised it, but I think there's some differences. Kaivan, what's your view about whether the Ukrainians are being, the
Yeah,
fact
I
that
mean,
they're
I
not
think,
going to be
you
present.
said it. What is, I think, pretty clear difference in approach from this administration and Biden's administration. And I think one of the things about Donald Trump that's been a puzzle is why he does sort of give Putin unlimited chances. Even just a couple of weeks ago, he was sort of coming out saying that he's a bad guy. Finally, the last guy on earth, it seems, to realize that. But I don't think that much is going to happen on Friday. I think, Mark at the outset pretty much called it that he's going to have a very strong position, Putin, when he gets in there. I also think it's pretty interesting. You hear about this listening exercise. I cannot imagine a Democratic president getting away with saying they're having a listening exercise with a global leader in this conflict that they said they would resolve on day one and not getting hammered for sounding weak. So I do think, we're talking about the media. I think I see a bit of a double standard there too.
Lyndsay.
Yeah, it's definitely a complicated situation. And I also think, Jim, if you look at President Trump's relationship with Vladimir Zelensky, it's very complicated as well. I mean, it goes back to his first term and his frustration with him. But I also think you saw that blow up in the Oval Office. And really, you would see him criticize Putin and Zelensky quite often until the minerals deal was accomplished. I think for President Trump in his mind, that minerals deal really is a picture from his perspective of his unity with Ukraine, and that he's saying, we stand with Ukraine. What more do you need? He's also talked about the great relationship that he has with Putin. You would hear him speak on the campaign trail all the time. This would never happen under my watch if I was president, because he thinks that Putin respects him. I think what he is starting to question, and that's why you have the administration even walking back the seriousness of this summit and saying this is a listening session, is because they don't want to overpromise. He's been overpromising since day one. He said he could end this war in 24 hours after entering the Oval Office, and he hasn't been able to do that. And even the president himself has said, yeah, this has turned out to be more complicated than I even thought. Going to say, I think he'll pick up the phone and have a great conversation with Putin. And then just the next day, he is, lambasting Ukraine and making gains. And he's like, what's happening? So I think even he won't say this publicly because he is a deal maker and he understands that if he criticizes Putin too much, which he has done some, that he thinks it will prevent him from getting the deal he wants or from making the gain. And I also think that it is notable here to show all the work he's been trying to do with peace deals for other countries to show I can do it. See, guys, I can do these deals. I can make peace, because he hasn't been able to be successful with one of the most critical things he thought he could finish. And we even look at what's happening between Israel and Hamas still. A big challenge, two key elements that he said he'd be able to end, and he hasn't been able to. So I think that's why he's been kind of walking it back. To answer your question, Jim, I do think that we're seeing a more unified Europe. You see that with the NATO Secretary General, even now buying weapons from the US to give to Ukraine. It was a huge win. The 5% from NATO, that was something Trump's wanted since his first term. These are all positive gains to show that Europe is in unison, is unified around Ukraine, and I would say, and not Russia. You have Mark Rutte saying consistently that Russia is the concern. And I think as long as you have that, last thing I'll say here, this is something, and when you talk about Trump's overall, idea of how he sees the world should work. He doesn't think that the US should be the savior of the world. He thinks that people should be able to defend themselves. And that's why he's really pushing Europe to defend Ukraine more than the US, even though he supports their defense. And so I just think that's like a different approach than we've seen from someone like Biden, who was wanted to be much more involved on the ground and was criticized for it because people said he didn't give them what they needed to finish it off. So I think that Ukraine is in a much different position now than you're saying there, because you have Europe so unified around them, and even having this meeting tomorrow with Zelensky ahead of it.
Want more great clips like that? I've got an idea. Hit the subscribe button, be part of the Two-Way community, never miss a clip, and you can always watch our full episodes, join them live, go to twoway.tv.